I am Jeff Sachs, Director of the Earth Institute, and just incredibly proud and delighted at the Student Research Showcase for the Earth Institute. The Earth Institute and our partners around the university have been able to establish research programs and teaching programs all over Columbia University, I think making Columbia really in the global leadership of the teaching and training and research of sustainable development. And today's research showcase highlights all of this wonderful work. Students have been in Africa, they've been in Asia, they've been in Europe, they've been at leading organizations, they've been doing bench and lab research, they've been out in the field, in the Millennium Villages, and out in ecosystems exploring change and threats to ecosystems and ways to find a path back to sustainability. I know that there are superb poster sessions that will amaze and delight all the participants. My congratulations to you, my commitment. The Earth Institute is with you. We are so proud of what you're accomplishing, and we know that today's students in sustainable development soon enough will be the world leaders in sustainable development, and that gives us a lot of hope.
I went to Fiji and I interviewed a number of fishermen in this particular village who have been wanting to set up a marine protected area on part of their reef. So they would set aside a portion of the reef that they usually fish on and say, for a certain number of years, we're not going to fish for anything here. And they want to do this because they've had some concerns about overfishing, about the actual coral reefs themselves becoming degraded, and they just want to protect that and see if they can get the fish species to rebound. So what I did is I went there and I spoke to both men and women who fish a lot, and asked them, so what do you fish for the most? Where do you fish for it? What are you most concerned about? What have you seen happen to the reef over the 20, 30 years that you've been fishing here? And then what do you want to do about it? So given all of this information, I could then create the best possible fishing protection for them. This picture shows one of the interviews that I did with a couple of the female fishers. This was actually a really stark example of why we were there in the first place, because as we were setting up the net, as we were waiting out there, the women were saying, when we used to do this when we were younger, we would have maybe half a dozen women of the village. We would chase the fish into the net, and you would get a substantial number of fish. And we did it with the four of us, the two women and myself and the woman who took the picture. And we caught 2 fish that were about that size, which is just this incredible example of how overfishing has affected this village.
We looked at the commercial food waste in New York City, the volume and the spatial layout over the 5 boroughs to see if that amount of food waste was sufficient to meet the food insecure population need in New York City. So examples of edible food waste are whole croissants or cookies or baguettes that are tossed. They're tossed away just because they aren't freshly baked that day, and those can be used in the food pantries and in the soup kitchens. But then you also have the non-edible food waste, such as the pineapple tops and coffee grounds. Those things can be used in community gardens and for composting. And the mayor's office has come out with the Food Waste Challenge, and we'd really like to share our research with the mayor's office to increase awareness, and which would lead to behavioral change.
My project is looking at vehicle noise disturbance on South African game reserves, specifically looking at lions, cheetahs, rhinos, and elephants. I became interested in this project mainly because for the last 3 years I was working on a game reserve in South Africa doing large carnivore research, and I was really seeing the impacts that these roads were having on these different types of animals. This photo shows the influences of the roads and how close they are to the actual protected areas. These two cheetah boys are looking across the savanna and the area that they live in, and they can see the roads, they can hear the noise all the time. And so this is a very important thing to be looking at and seeing if they're avoiding these roads and these areas for the most part because of these vehicle noise disturbances. So one of the most interesting things that I think will come out of this is seeing the impact of human buildings and road construction on these game animals. And this hasn't been done before, so it will really impact on how South Africa is going to be building their infrastructure and their road development.
So my project investigated the relationship between crocodiles and environmental change and how they adjust and they respond to this change. We surveyed the coast of southeastern Cuba, where the largest population of the American crocodiles happens, and record and mark new crocodile hatchlings. And also, every night we went out to the swamp and with our flashlights look for the shiny eyes of adult crocodiles just above waterline. One of the things very interesting that we found is that crocodiles respond to environmental change by adjusting the number of nests that they lay the following year the change occurred. So for instance, after Hurricane Sandy, we had 50 out of 150 nests producing at least one crocodile hatching. This is very low. However, the following year, we had a record of 300 nests, with most of them producing a surviving hatching. And this was because the mangroves buffer and take most of the damage that hurricanes do. They also open new areas for crocodiles that are suitable for nesting, and that's why you see that peak after the hurricane.
My project is to compile a database for all of the climate-related legislation around the globe. So my first task has been South America in particular. So it involves finding this legislation and then creating this online database that can be a kind of a first place to look for environmental lawyers and people interested in climate change and getting a global picture. The Center for Climate Change Law website has been intended for different environmental lawyers and academics to be used as a valuable resource. So as you can see, we have all of the different countries linked, so you can very easily assess the laws from each country. The most rewarding part about my research is that because climate change is such a global issue, the Center for Climate Change Law compiling this database will get a global picture of the different climate change laws, and will eventually be able to use this data to come up with best practices.
We basically did manipulation of carbon dioxide experiments to different phytoplankton species to assess their different physiological properties that are affected by ocean acidification. I think there is a lot of potential in this project because we were one of the first ones who started to do species-specific experiments with phytoplankton in the Amazon River plume. And there needs to be more sets just to see if there's a significant factor that is played by carbon dioxide concentrations.
I work with a group of 3 other students and a team of about 24 urban design master's students. We're working on housing and planning strategies in Kisumu. So my project in particular is working with water drainage and housing. So a lot of the issues now are situated along what's called the Auji River, which is a low point for the city of Kisumu. And we're working with master planning processes to try to figure out the best way for housing to densify, because a lot of the housing there now is rebuilt seasonally. It's destroyed by floods. So a lot of the people we talk to have to go through this process of rebuilding every season. We have a few what we call visualizations or renders of what the space would look like. Those are settings along the Algae Canal, and we're looking at building kind of an urban agricultural community around that space. And there are a few drawings that are looking at sectionally how the built landscape works with the ground underneath it. And this is very critical because of the water table, which is very high. So whenever a building is actually trying to build higher, you need a stronger foundation. And in order to do that, digging lower, you're competing with the water table that's very high. And this is an issue that comes up with sanitation and water access. So we're looking at empowering the people there and creating stronger, longer lasting alternatives.
So I started researching this project to try to find a solution to the problem of the high price of fresh water. We were trying to create a system that harnessed the immense pressures that exist within the ocean at deep depth. So basically, the enormous weight of the ocean creates pressure. And as you go deeper down, each atmosphere of pressure creates more and more weight. Now, a membrane that is used in a typical desalination plant requires 60 atmospheres of pressure to force the water through. And that energy is typically provided by a coal power plant or some type of surface energy. So what we wanted to do was use the power available in the ocean, the weight of the water itself, to do the work for us. This image depicts the system in action. The system will be located on the ocean floor with a membrane open to the ocean. The water will be pushed through the membrane and clean water will be created on the inside. After that, the water will be pumped to the surface using renewable energy. So in essence, we created a system that required no external energy and created a very cheap way for people to get fresh water.
So I was working with the Community Education Worker Project in Sauri Village in Western Kenya. Basically, there has been a problem of really high dropout rates in this particular village. So they were kind of looking to see why the dropout rates are so high in this area, and also to see whether or not the intervention that they had begun in kind of a pilot project form a year previous, if it was having the intended benefit of reducing dropout rates. And the picture that kind of emerged from the data was different from what people had thought previously about why children were not going to school. So that was really powerful information to be able to gather. And we were able to really communicate that information in a meeting with school administrators and policymakers. And having the data to back us up really started this conversation about some kind of harmful practices that are ongoing in the school system. I think that sometimes there's a myth that children do not want to go to school, and that's the reason why they're dropping out. But across the board, we really found that there is a great desire for education and for learning, and that given the means, children will complete their education.
My project is about organizing an executive training in summer 2014, hosted by VCC and CGSD. And I got interested in it because I do have a background in the mining industry, and I'm passionate about sustainable development in the extractive sector. The training actually encompasses everything, right from contract negotiations and the aspects of a contract. So a lot of the public officials in, say, underdeveloped countries in Africa have to negotiate with multinational corporations and perhaps lack the skill set needed to do that. So it encompasses contract negotiations, the fiscal terms, how they could get the most out of extractive sector project in their region, and also putting forth in the contract also essential environmental regulations and community development regulations.
We have two clients. The first one is Isla Urbana. They're a rainwater harvesting system, and the other one is Sistema Biobolsa, and they create biodigesters. So our task was to help these two companies work together, and the place that we identified as the most useful for that would be a peri-urban type area. So that's an area on the fringes of an urban center that incorporates rural activities such as farming, but still has access to public transportation, but may not have access to municipal services such as water or sanitation. One of the photographs that we have is of the farmer showing off the gas in her kitchen and the cheese that she is making. She makes cheese and yogurt and cream, which she can sell in small markets or to friends. Also, her daughter is a baker, and it's helped offset her baking expenses to be able to use this gas that they get for free using the waste from their farm animals, which they already have. So it's really wonderful to see her be able to produce this on even such a small scale and as supplemental income in such a great way.
So I was looking at the impact of economic concentration and natural resource dependency on democratic institutional strength and economic performance. So basically how, if a country is exporting one kind of good primarily, and specifically if it's a natural resource, how that impacts how institutions develop and how the economy develops. I went to Nigeria and Botswana, and my third case study was Finland, which is where I'm from. And I was in Nigeria and Botswana doing fieldwork, kind of collecting research on kind of a more qualitative analysis of this, as opposed to just a quantitative regression, which is not always very helpful when it'll give you some clear answer, but doesn't tell you any why or any causal links. So I did fieldwork as well to back up my regression findings.
Our project was about helping the Montenegrin government to design an energy retrofitting program for 100,000 unpermitted buildings in Montenegro. We were tasked to help the government integrate energy retrofitting in the process of legalization.
So basically the government, what they are trying to do is to formalize those buildings. Why? Because with this, they will expand like the tax basis, they will expand revenue, they will also make sure that the owners of the buildings will be like, they will have property rights that are going to be secured, and that they will be able to trade those properties, and that they are going to be able to get appreciation on the properties. So all these problems, the government just want to take over and want to make sure that they formalize the buildings. But on the other hand, they also take an opportunity to make the building more efficient. So it saves money to the government, it saves money to the residents, and it creates like an economic opportunity for both parties.
I worked on a project for the Agriculture and Food Security Center of the Earth Institute to understand the main determinants of crop variation for small-scale farmers in the Millennium Villages project. I was working mainly with spatially referenced soil data and data collected on the biophysical constraints to production in order to produce digital soil maps to help farmers understand better the management practices that will improve their crop yields. I worked on 4 sites. It was Sauri in Kenya, Wandama in Malawi, Moyange in Rwanda, and Sada in Ghana. I think one of the biggest impacts that this research will have is to help the small-scale farmers understand the main reasons why crop yields differ so dramatically, moving from one agroecological zone to another. we'll see in a map of Sauri that there are 3 different agroecological zones, and if we plot the crop yields along with those zones, we can understand the great impact that the zones have just on the different management practices. It will also help farmers understand whether they should be opting for intercropping versus monoculture, whether they should opt for organic fertilizers versus mineral fertilizers, and a whole bunch of other practices that greatly influence crop yields.